Queen Victoria's great-grandchildren. Part 2. The grandchildren of Alice, Alfred, and Helena. Ever since I published videos on Queen Victoria's 9 children and 42 grandchildren, I get comments on nearly every other video requesting I cover Queen Victoria's great-grandchildren. I have done more in-depth biographies on 2 sets of Her Majesty's great-grandchildren, the children of King George V of the UK, one of whom abdicated the throne and dumped it on his younger brother in one of the biggest royal scandals of the 20th century, and the children of Alexandra Feodorovna, Empress of Russia, who were murdered during the Russian Revolution. I will link those videos in the description. Over this 3-part series, I'll introduce you to all 85 of Her Majesty's great-grandchildren and cover the highlights and lowlights of their lives. And to get ahead of the inevitable next request that I cover her great-great-grandchildren, of which there were 142, I will also include in this series subsequent generations who did and still do occupy or claim thrones. Let's meet all 85 of Queen Victoria's great-grandchildren. Victoria's 3rd child, Alice, married Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine. They had 7 children, 4 of whom had issue. Victoria married German prince and British Army officer Louis of Battenberg. During World War I, they were loyal to the UK and anglicized the family name to Mountbatten. Alice had congenital deafness. She met Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, 4th son of King George I of Greece, at Edward VII's coronation. They married and had 4 daughters and 1 son. Alice was a Red Cross nurse during the Balkan Wars. The Greek royal family were blamed for the loss of the war and forced into exile in 1917. They were allowed to return in 1920, but in 22, Andrew was partly blamed for the loss of the Greco-Turkish War and was nearly shot by a firing squad. He and his family were banished instead. Many of Alice's relatives were being deposed and murdered across Europe, and the stress overwhelmed her. She became deeply religious, saw visions of Christ and the Buddha, and believed that she had healing powers. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, removed from her family, and committed to a sanitarium. Dr. Sigmund Freud believed that she was sexually frustrated and recommended X-raying her ovaries to kill her libido. While Alice was locked up, all 4 of her daughters married, and her son was sent to the UK to be raised by his grandmother. After 2 years, she was released. She refused to speak to her family and moved back to Greece to work with the poor. During World War II, Germany occupied Greece. Alice ran soup kitchens and an orphanage and hid a Jewish mother and her children from the Nazis. In 1947, Alice attended the wedding of her son, Prince Philip, to the future Queen Elizabeth II. She gave her son the few diamonds she still had to place in the princess's engagement ring. Now widowed, Alice returned to Greece and founded a nursing order of nuns. She later moved back to the UK and spent her final years in Buckingham Palace near her son and his family. She died there in 1969, age 84. Louise received a proposal from Manuel II, King of Portugal, but declined. She was close with her sister Alice and became secretly engaged to her new brother-in-law, Prince Christopher of Greece, but his family's unstable throne tore them apart. When she was 24, she and her mother went to visit her aunt, Empress Alexandra of Russia. They were alarmed by Rasputin's influence and warned the Empress against him. World War I broke out during the trip, and Victoria and Louise had to flee. Louise joined the British Red Cross. She continued her work with children after the war. She had a relationship with Alexander Stuart Hill, a Scottish artist, but her father explained that Alexander was most likely gay, and she broke off the engagement. By 34, Louise thought she would never marry. But when the widowed Crown Prince of Sweden, Gustav Adolf, began courting her, she was happy to accept his proposal. They had a happy marriage and one child who was stillborn. Louise was shy but warmed to royal duties and was popular. The couple traveled widely and were down to earth. At a reception in the United States, they refused to greet guests while sitting on thrones, preferring a more informal event. The crown princess was an outspoken supporter of gender equality. During World War II, she saved numerous lives by helping people escape the Nazis to neutral Sweden. She set up a home for Finnish orphans of the Winter War. Louise became queen consort in 1950. She didn't take herself too seriously, loosened up court protocol, and invited career women to the palace. She died in 1965, age 75. George Mountbatten served in the Royal Navy in World War I. He wed Russian aristocrat Nadia Mikhailovna and had 2 children. He became Marquis of Milford Haven and died of bone cancer at 45. Louis Mountbatten served in the Navy during World War I. In the Roaring Twenties, he was among the bright young things. Louis was bisexual. He married English heiress Edwina Ashley, and they spent their marriage in other people's beds. The couple had 2 daughters, Patricia and Pamela. He was also a surrogate father to his nephew, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. During World War II, Louis was appointed Supreme Allied Commander in East Asia. He oversaw the recapture of Burma and Singapore and was created Earl of Burma. Louis guided Philip's naval career and arranged a meeting with Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne. The pair hit it off and married in 1947. Louis was thrilled that the new royal dynasty would bear his name of Mountbatten, but the royal family decided that they would stick with Windsor. Louis was the last British Viceroy of India and oversaw its transition to an independent nation. In 1979, while vacationing in Ireland, Louis, his daughter, and her 2 sons went out on their lobster boat. The vessel was bombed by the IRA. Louis, his 14-year-old grandson, Nicholas, and a crew member were killed. Louis was buried at Westminster Abbey and was eulogized by Prince Charles. Irene married fellow great-grandchild Prince Heinrich of Prussia, and they had 3 sons. Double great-grandchildren Waldemar, Sigismund, and Heinrich have already been covered in the previous video. Ernst Louis, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine, followed his grandmother's request and married his first cousin, Princess Victoria Melita of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, but the union was unhappy. They had 1 child. Elizabeth was indulged by her father, but was sweet and never acted spoiled. Queen Victoria adored her. Her parents divorced, and Elizabeth split her time between them, an unusual situation at the time. At 8, she went to visit the Russian imperial family. The only child adored playing with her cousins. She fell suddenly ill and died before her parents could reach her. Rumors spread that she had eaten poison meant for the Tsar, but an autopsy concluded typhoid fever. Her heartbroken father later remarried Princess Eleanor of Solms, Hohenzollern-Lich, and had 2 sons. George Donatus married his first cousin once removed, Princess Cecilia of Greece and Denmark, daughter of Alice of Battenberg and favorite sister of Prince Philip. The couple joined the Nazi Party. In 1937, George, Cecily, and their 2 sons, Ludwig VI and Alexander IV, his mother and the children's nanny, boarded a small plane headed to the UK to attend his brother's wedding. On the flight, Cecily went into labor. The pilot tried to make an emergency landing but struggled in bad weather. The baby was delivered during the terrifying ordeal, but everyone on board was killed when the plane crashed. The couple's 3rd child, 14-month-old Ileana, had been left home. She was adopted by George's younger brother, Louis. He met Irish commoner Margaret Campbell Geddes at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. In the wake of the tragic plane crash, their glamorous royal wedding was cancelled and they married in a quiet family ceremony. The couple raised Ioana for 2 years, but she died of meningitis at 3. They had no children of their own. Louis died in 1968, age 59. Alex of Hesse married Tsar Nikolai II of Russia and took the Russian name Alexandra Fyodorovna. The couple had 4 daughters. Olga was compassionate, moody, and loved to read. Tatiana was even-tempered, hard-working, elegant, and artistic. She was the undisputed leader of the siblings. Maria was tall, strong, gentle, and well-behaved. She had classic middle child syndrome. And Anastasia was the charming troublemaker and family clown. The Tsar and Tsarina adored their daughters, but Russian law barred women from inheriting the throne. The court was relieved when Alexandra finally gave birth to a son, Alexei, who was Tsarevich and heir to the throne. But it soon became clear that he had the deadly blood disorder hemophilia. The Empress's own brother, Fridtjof, had died of the disease at 2. She spent nearly all of her time with Alexei, coddling and protecting him. He suffered bleeding, bruising, and excruciating pain from even the smallest injury. Desperate, Alexandra called on faith healer Grigory Rasputin, who seemed to be helping her child. He was charming to the imperial family, but vulgar in public. He bragged that he was sleeping with the Empress and dragged her reputation through the mud. Things were already going badly in Russia. Widespread poverty and starvation meant the people deeply begrudged the imperial family, and the emperor refused to make changes to help his people. There were numerous assassination attempts, both failed and successful, against members of the Romanov dynasty. To save the emperor's reputation, a group of royals murdered Rasputin. Olga wore a pink, jewel-encrusted gown and kokoshnik tiara to her 16th birthday ball, one of the last happy times the Russian royals enjoyed. During World War I, Nikolai took command of the army, but was a terrible leader. His poor decisions resulted in the deaths of 3 million people. Olga and Tatiana nursed wounded soldiers and developed crushes on their patients. Russia was on the winning side, but the conflict drained the empire of men and resources. Revolution broke out, and the Tsar was forced to abdicate. The family were held under house arrest for over a year. The daughters fell ill with measles and had their heads shaved. Anastasia tried to lighten the mood with jokes and plays. In 1918, Nikolai, Alexandra, their 5 children and servants were woken in the middle of the night and told they were being moved again. First, they were ordered to pose for a photograph, but instead, guards marched in and opened fire. Olga was 22, Tatiana 21, Maria 19, Anastasia 17, and Alexei 13. The family were buried in a mass grave in the woods. Their remains were recovered in 1998 and 2007, and they were reburied in the Peter and Paul Basilica in St. Petersburg. Queen Victoria's 4th child, Alfred, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, married Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna of Russia. They had 5 children, 4 of whom had issue. Maria married King Ferdinand I and became Queen Consort of Romania. His uncle, King Carol I, was a member of the royal house of Hohenzollern, like Kaiser Wilhelm. He was elected King of Romania in 1866, after Moldavia and Wallachia united to form the new nation. Maria and Ferdinand had 6 children. The first 2 were taken from them by King Carol I and raised away from their parents. The subsequent fracture in the family caused the elder children to grow up cold and dysfunctional. Carol was the first heir to the throne of Romania to be raised in the country with the Romanian language. He joined the army and then deserted during World War I. Then he married commoner Zizi Lambrino. He wanted to renounce his claim to the throne, but his father forced him to leave his wife and marry his second cousin, Princess Helena of Greece and Denmark. They had one son, Michael. Carol abandoned his wife and child and ran away to Paris with a mistress. His furious father struck him from the family and allowed Helen to divorce him. When the king died, 5-year-old Michael inherited the throne. Carol returned and stole the throne from his son, just in time for the Great Depression. Financial instability and the king's government interference destabilized Romania. Carol formed a royal dictatorship and allied with the Nazis. But they shaved off large territories of Romania, and the people finally forced Carol out of the country. He was allowed to leave on a special train packed with his fortune, but citizens shot at him as he left the country. Carol spent the rest of his life in exile, plotting to once again dethrone his son. He married his mistress, Magda Lupescu, and died in 1953, age 59. Michael allowed his father to be buried in the royal vault, but refused to attend the funeral. Elizabeth married the future King George II of Greece. She was introverted and struggled with royal duties. She assisted refugees in the Greco-Turkish War. When her husband was deposed in 1924, they moved to her home in Bucharest. But the marriage deteriorated and they divorced in 1935. Elizabeth had an affair with a banker who advised her on investments and made her an incredibly wealthy woman. During her nephew's reign, she became a communist and worked to undermine his rule. She was nicknamed the King's Red Aunt. In 1947, communists took over the country and abolished the monarchy. Despite her loyalty to the party, Elizabeth, as a royal, was banished. She spent the rest of her life on the French Riviera. She had an affair with artist Marc Favart, 30 years her junior, and adopted him so that he could inherit her estate. Elizabeth died in 1956, age 62. Maria was well-educated, artistic, and spoke several languages. She fell in love with Alexandra I, king of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. In 1929, the country changed its name to Yugoslavia. The queen embraced her people and devoted herself to helping poor children. She gave her first son a Serbian name, Peter, her second son a Croatian name, Tomislav, and her third son a Slovenian name, Andrew, to promote unity. Despite the queen's popularity, many were against the monarchy. Her husband was assassinated in 1934, leaving the throne to their 11-year-old son, Peter. The widowed Queen Mother suffered rheumatism. She moved to a farm in England for her health and took her younger sons, but was required to leave King Peter behind at 16. 2 years later, the Nazis attacked Yugoslavia, and Peter fled to join his mother. She sent funds to aid Yugoslavian prisoners during World War II. After the war, the Yugoslavian monarchy was abolished. Former King Peter settled in the United States. Maria died in the UK in 1961, age 61. Nicholas was regent to his 5-year-old nephew, King Michael I of Romania. He was a decent leader but hated politics and resented having to leave his army career. When his brother Carol I took back the throne, he was happy to step down. He was in love with the divorcee, Ileana Dumitrescu Dolti, whom he couldn't marry without the monarch's consent. His brother privately told him that if he married Ileana secretly, he would approve the union as a fait accompli. The couple eloped, but the king had deceived his brother and used the illegal marriage to drive them out of the country. Nicholas settled in Switzerland and took up motor racing, completing the 24-hour Le Mans race twice. He died in 1978, age 74. Helena was an avid sailor and organizer of the Girl Guides. Her mother arranged her marriage to Archduke Anton of Austria, and they had 6 children. They lived in Austria and Romania. During World War II, Helena converted their castle into a soldier's hospital. When the monarchy fell, the family fled and settled in Massachusetts in the United States. There, Helena wrote 2 books and spoke against communism. In 1954, she and Anton divorced, and she married Dr. Stefan Nicholas Isaruscu. They divorced 11 years later, and Helena became a nun. She died in 1991, age 82. Mircea was very close to her sister Helena. She died of typhoid fever at the age of 3. Victoria had an unhappy arranged marriage to her first cousin, Ernst Louis, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine. We met their only child together, Elizabeth, when we covered Ernst's children. After the divorce, Victoria married the man she had been in love with first, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich of Russia. During the revolution, the family fled to Finland, leaving all their wealth behind. They had 3 children. Maria married German Prince Karl of Leiningen and had 7 children. He was forced to join the German army and was taken captive by the Soviets at the end of World War II. He starved to death in a prisoner of war camp. Left with little money, Maria struggled to support her children. She died 5 years later of a heart attack at 44. Kira, the family's diminished position made finding a husband on the royal marriage market difficult. At 30, she wed Queen Victoria's great-great-grandson, Louis Ferdinand of Prussia, and had 7 children. She was one of the royals who met Anna Anderson, a woman claiming to be her long-lost cousin, Archduchess Anastasia Romanov. Kira had last seen her cousin at the age of 7, but she was convinced that the unladylike Anderson was not her. Kira died in 1967, age 58. Vladimir. As his father was the senior member of the Romanov family to survive the Russian Revolution, he claimed the title Tsar of Russia, and Vladimir was Tsarevich. He studied at the University of London. At the outbreak of World War II, he was living in France. He supported Germany's mission against communism in Russia, hoping he might get his family's throne back. But when he refused to order Russian immigrants to support the Nazis, he was sent to a concentration camp. He survived and married Princess Leonida Bagration-Mukansky after the war. They had 1 daughter. Vladimir continued to assert his right to the Russian throne and called on the West to wage war against the Soviets. While giving a speech in Miami in 1992, he suddenly fell unconscious and died at the age of 74. Alexandra married Ernst II, Prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, and had 5 children. Gottfried was engaged to American railroad heiress Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, but the relationship fell through. He wed Princess Margareta of Greece and Denmark, older sister of Prince Philip, and they had 6 children. Gottfried joined the Nazi Party and the German army. He was badly wounded on the Russian front and turned against the Nazi cause. He was involved in Operation Valkyrie, a plot to assassinate Hitler, take over the German government, and make peace with the Allies. On July 20, 1944, conspirators detonated a bomb during a meeting in the Wolf's Lair. But the Fuhrer and his senior officers were shielded from the blast by a conference table. In the wake of the failed plot, the Gestapo arrested more than 7,000 people under suspicion of involvement. They executed nearly 5,000. Prince Gottfried managed to avoid execution, but he was expelled from the army. After the war, he worked as a businessman. He died in 1960, age 63. Marie Melita married Wilhelm Friedrich, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein, and had 4 children. Alexandra's 2 youngest daughters, Alexandra and Irma, did survive to adulthood, but I found no other information about them. Her youngest child, Alfred, died 2 days after birth. Beatrice wed Spanish Prince Alfonso, Duke of Galliera, and had 3 children. Alvaro married Carla Parodi Delfino and had 4 children. He inherited his father's title of Duke of Galliera. He died in 1997, age 87. Alonso was killed in action during the Spanish Civil War. Ataulfo never married. He was one of the few Spanish royals who was willing to work in Francisco Franco's fascist government after the dictator took over Spain in 1936. Ataulfo died in 1974, age 60. Victoria's 5th child, Helena, married Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein and had 5 children, only one of whom had a child. Valerie Marie was born in 1900 out of wedlock to Prince Albert and an unknown woman, whom he later said was of high noble birth. The baby was adopted by Reuben and Anna Schwab, a Jewish couple in Austria, and raised with their 9 other children. Before his death, Prince Albert wrote to Valerie admitting his paternity. In light of her new parentage, she changed her name to Zu Schleswig-Holstein. She fell in love with Prince Engelbert Charles, Duke of Arenburg, in 1939. But she had to give evidence to the court to prove her paternity, as Jews were not allowed to marry Aryans. While Valerie's newly revealed parentage allowed her to escape persecution during the Holocaust, several of her adoptive siblings were murdered in concentration camps. Valerie died by suicide in 1953. Queen Victoria's 6th child, Louise, married John Campbell, 9th Duke of Argyll, but because he was gay, they didn't have any children. In the final episode, we'll meet the grandchildren of Queen Victoria's 7th, 8th, and 9th children, Arthur, Leopold, and Beatrice. Among them, a crown prince and princess of Sweden, a queen consort of Denmark, heirs to the Spanish throne, claimants to the French throne, and the unfortunate children of the worst royal Nazi in the bunch. Don't want to wait to see the next episode? Patrons get exclusive early access to almost all of my multi-part series on Patreon early. If you would like to become a patron and help me make more fascinating history videos, check out the link in the description. Thank you for watching. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.